when my mom called and said, "Ava, maybe skip Thanksgiving this year. Ethan just got engaged and we want him to have the spotlight," I went quiet. She said it like it was normal, like pushing me aside was just another part of the family routine. I could hear my dad in the background, laughing with Ethan, talking about the menu. No one even asked how I was doing. It hit me harder than I expected. I hung up and sat in silence for a long time, just staring at the ocean outside my window. I had worked so hard to build this life. From late nights sleeping on a friend's couch to owning my own business, I thought I had finally made them proud. But it never mattered. No matter what I achieved, Ethan was always their golden boy. I tried not to cry, but it hurt. I wasn't angry at first, just tired. Tired of being the afterthought, the one they only called when they needed money or advice. They never asked about my life unless it was to compare it to Ethan's. When I started my company, they called it a cute little project. When Ethan got a promotion, they threw a barbecue for him. I thought about past Thanksgivings, how I'd always show up early to help Mom cook, how she'd correct everything I did, saying, "That's not how I taught Ethan." Or how Dad would tell stories about Ethan's achievements in front of everyone, barely mentioning me. Last year, I even brought gifts for everyone, and my mom said, "You're always trying too hard." This time, I didn't argue. I didn't beg to come. I just said, "Sure, Mom. Have a great Thanksgiving." I could feel her relief through the phone, like she was glad to be rid of me. When I hung up, something inside me shifted. I realized I had spent years chasing their approval, waiting for a moment that was never coming. They were never going to see me for who I was. I could give them the world, and they'd still ask what Ethan got. So, I decided right there that I was done begging for space at their table. I wasn't going to sit alone feeling sorry for myself either. I had a beautiful home by the beach, people who respected me, and a life I built on my own terms. I started to think, what if I turned this rejection into something better? What if I made my own Thanksgiving, one that didn't hurt to attend? That thought gave me a spark of energy I hadn't felt in years. I got up, made myself coffee, and looked around my villa. It was calm, warm, peaceful. Everything their house never was. Maybe being excluded wasn't the curse I thought it was. Maybe it was freedom. And that's when I decided, if they didn't want me at their table, I'd make sure they knew what it felt like to be the ones left out. Growing up, I learned early that love in my family came with conditions. My parents made it clear who their favorite was. Ethan, my younger brother, could do no wrong. If he forgot to do his chores, Mom would laugh and say, "He's just tired." But if I missed one thing, I was lazy or ungrateful. It became normal for me to be blamed for things I didn't even do. At school, I worked hard. I brought home good grades, but my parents barely noticed. When Ethan got a C on his report card, Dad called him a genius who just needs to focus. I remember sitting at the dinner table, listening to them praise him for the smallest things, while they picked apart everything I did. It wasn't just favoritism. It was a reminder that I would never be enough for them. When I turned 16, I got my first job at a diner to save money for college. I'd come home late, exhausted, and Mom would complain that I didn't spend enough time with the family. Meanwhile, Ethan would stay out with friends all night, and she'd just say, "He's a growing boy." It made no sense, but I learned not to argue. In college, things got harder. My parents couldn't, or wouldn't, help with tuition, saying money was tight. Yet when Ethan enrolled a few years later, they paid for his apartment and car. I didn't even get a call on my graduation day. They said they were too busy planning Ethan's birthday party. That was the day I promised myself I'd never depend on them again. I started from nothing. I worked multiple jobs, sometimes sleeping only a few hours a night. Slowly, I built a small wellness brand that grew into a multimillion-dollar company. I wanted to show them I was capable, that their daughter wasn't a failure. But when I finally succeeded, they didn't celebrate. Mom said, "Don't let success get to your head." Dad told me, "Money can't buy family, Ava, remember that." Those words stayed with me, not because they were wise, but because they hurt. I wasn't trying to buy family, I was just trying to be seen. But no matter what I achieved, they twisted it into something negative. When I bought my first house, Mom said I was showing off. When I paid off my student loans, Dad said, "You always think you're better than us." It didn't matter what I did. They always found a way to make me feel small. They wanted me to be successful enough to brag about, but humble enough to obey. That balance didn't exist. I realized they didn't love me for who I was. They loved what I could give or represent. By the time I hit 30, I had stopped trying. I sent cards on holidays, called once in a while, and kept my distance. I thought that maybe, with time, things would get better. But deep down, I knew my parents would never see me as anything more than the daughter who made them uncomfortable just by succeeding. 2 years before that painful phone call, I thought I was finally doing something that would make my parents proud. They had called me one evening, worried and desperate. The bank was threatening to foreclose on their house. My dad said, "We might lose the home, Ava. Your mother's so stressed she can't sleep." I didn't even hesitate. Without thinking twice, I offered to pay off their mortgage. I wanted to help them. I thought maybe this time, they'd see how much I cared. They accepted, of course. Mom cried on the phone, thanking me again and again. For the first time in years, I felt like their daughter, not the outsider, not the disappointment. I sent the money directly to clear the debt, feeling a quiet relief that I could finally give back to them. For a short while, things between us felt lighter. They called more often. Dad even said he was proud of me. I let myself believe things had finally changed. A few months later, everything fell apart. I was visiting for a weekend when I overheard Ethan talking to a friend about his house. At first, I thought he was joking. But when I asked what he meant, he looked surprised and said, "Mom and Dad signed it over to me. Didn't they tell you?" My stomach dropped. I confronted my parents immediately, and Mom just smiled nervously, saying, "You don't need to worry about that, Ava. Ethan's starting a family soon. He needs stability." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had paid off their entire mortgage, and they gave the deed to Ethan like it was nothing. No discussion, no warning, no thank you. Just another example of how my efforts never counted. I stood there, shaking, and asked, "Do you even understand what you've done?" Dad looked at me coldly and said, "You're overreacting. You have plenty of money. This house means more to your brother than it does to you." That cut deeper than anything they had ever said before. It wasn't about the money. It was about the complete lack of respect. I had saved the home they lived in for decades, and they turned it into another way to show me that I didn't belong. When I tried to explain how betrayed I felt, Mom snapped, "You're always making everything about money, Ava. Maybe if you cared more about family than your career, you'd understand." That was the moment something inside me broke. I realized they would never see my kindness as love. They'd only see it as leverage. I left the next morning without saying goodbye. I drove back to California in silence, crying the entire way. Since then, I kept my distance. I stopped trying to fix things, stopped offering help. I focused on my life, my work, my peace. But even after all that, being told I wasn't welcome for Thanksgiving brought those old wounds right back. It reminded me of the truth I had tried so hard to ignore. No matter what I did, I would never be enough for them. After that phone call, I told myself I'd spend Thanksgiving alone. I wasn't in the mood to be around anyone. My house in Malibu was quiet, with the sound of the ocean always in the background. I thought it would be peaceful to just cook something simple, maybe watch a movie, and let the day pass. I didn't want to think about my family or the dinner they'd have without me. The night before Thanksgiving, I sat on the couch scrolling through my phone. Old photos showed up, Thanksgivings from years ago. In one picture, I was maybe 10 years old, standing beside my mom, holding a pie. She wasn't smiling. Ethan, on the other hand, was in every photo surrounded by laughter and attention. I kept swiping, and each image reminded me how small they always made me feel, even when I tried my best. I looked around my villa. The place was everything I had worked for: wide windows, warm lights, the ocean stretching endlessly outside. It felt peaceful, but also empty. Not because I was alone, but because I realized how much I had hidden this life from them. I had built everything they said I couldn't, yet I'd been too afraid to show it. For years, I had downplayed my success, afraid it would make them treat me worse. That night, I felt something shift. I was done being quiet. I was done letting them define what I could celebrate. I wasn't going to sit there pretending their rejection didn't bother me. If they didn't want me at their table, fine. But I could build my own, one they'd never forget. I got up, grabbed a notebook, and started planning. I called a local event planner and asked if she could arrange a full Thanksgiving dinner. Beautiful decor, a chef, music, everything. She sounded surprised that I was organizing it on such short notice, but I told her, money isn't the issue. I just need it perfect. By morning, things were already in motion. A team arrived to set up long tables outside facing the beach. I ordered flowers, candles, and a menu full of dishes that would make any family dinner look small in comparison. But it wasn't about showing off. It was about finally claiming my space, showing the world, and maybe myself, that I had every right to celebrate my success. As I watched the preparations unfold, I started thinking about who I could invite. For once, I didn't want to fill the seats with people who pitted me or wanted something from me. I wanted people who truly cared, who had been there quietly supporting me when no one else did. I thought of old friends, my business partner, my assistant who became like family. By the time the sun began to set that evening, the villa looked magical, soft lights reflecting on the water, the scent of roasted turkey in the air. I stood there barefoot on the patio, watching the sky turn gold and pink. For the first time, I didn't feel small. I didn't feel unwanted. I felt powerful. And deep down, I knew this Thanksgiving wasn't just about peace anymore. It was about showing everyone, especially my family, that I was no longer the forgotten one. Once the decorations were done and the tables were set, I sat down with my laptop and began writing a list of names. I didn't plan to invite my parents or Ethan, not after everything that had happened. But there were other people who had been part of my life, relatives, old neighbors, and family friends who had once looked down on me when I struggled. I remembered how they used to whisper, calling me too proud for leaving Ohio. Some said I'd never last in California. Well, I had lasted. And now, I wanted them to see the life I had built. I opened my email and typed out a simple message. Hi everyone. This Thanksgiving, I'd love for you to join me at my home in Malibu for dinner by the beach. No expectations, just gratitude, good food, and good company. I attached a few photos of the table set up by the ocean and hit send. It wasn't meant to show off. It was an open invitation to anyone who had ever doubted me to see that I had made it without bitterness or apology. At first, I didn't think much of it. But by the next morning, my phone started buzzing with replies. Some were polite. That sounds wonderful, Ava. Thank you for the invite. Others were surprised. Wait, you live in Malibu now? And then there were a few awkward ones. Wow, that's quite a house. Within hours, the message spread further than I expected. My cousin Tara texted me, saying, "Your invite's all over the family chat. Aunt Carol thinks you married rich." I laughed to myself because I knew the truth would shock them even more. I built everything on my own. By noon, the curiosity had turned into full-blown gossip. Someone had forwarded the email to my brother's fiancée, Chloe. She couldn't resist sharing the photos, adding her own comments about how Ava always loved attention. From there, the pictures reached my parents. It didn't take long before I got a short message from my mom. "Your Thanksgiving plans look extravagant. Didn't know you were hosting." That was it. No congratulations, no warmth. Just curiosity mixed with jealousy. I didn't reply. I didn't owe her an explanation. But I knew she'd tell my dad and he'd tell Ethan, and soon enough, they'd all be talking about me again. Only this time, the tone would be different. I could imagine the scene in their house, Mom frowning, Dad pretending not to care, Ethan trying to downplay it. But deep down, I knew they'd be wondering how I did it. That night, I stood by my living room window watching the waves crash against the shore. I felt calm. For years, they had made me feel small, unwanted, and out of place. Now they were the ones on the outside, talking about me, trying to make sense of a life they never believed I could have. It wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about taking back the power they once had over me. The invitations had done exactly what I wanted. They reminded everyone, especially my family, that I wasn't the quiet, overlooked daughter anymore. I was the one hosting the dinner everyone suddenly wanted to be part of. Thanksgiving morning came with soft sunlight and the sound of waves against the shore. The villa looked perfect, warm golden lights along the patio, candles flickering on the tables, and the smell of roasted turkey filling the air. The private chef and his team moved quietly, setting dishes of sweet potatoes, cranberry sauce, and fresh bread across the long dining table by the ocean. Everything looked like a dream, the kind of holiday I used to imagine when I was younger but never had. By late afternoon, guests began to arrive. One by one, they stepped into the courtyard, their faces lighting up in surprise. Old relatives I hadn't seen in years hugged me tightly, telling me how proud they were. Some admitted they never realized how far I'd come. I welcomed them all with a calm smile, not out of pride, but out of peace. For the first time, I wasn't trying to prove anything. I was simply being myself. Laughter filled the space as people mingled and took photos near the beach. The sunset painted the sky with pink and gold streaks, and I felt a quiet satisfaction watching everyone enjoy the evening. My assistant helped serve drinks, and soft music played in the background. It felt warm, genuine, everything family gatherings were supposed to feel like. Then, halfway through dinner, I noticed 3 familiar figures walking up the path from the gate. My heart skipped for a second when I realized it was my parents and Ethan. They weren't invited. My mother was dressed in a beige coat, pretending to be casual, while my dad carried a bottle of wine like it was a peace offering. Ethan walked slightly behind them, looking nervous. When they reached the entrance, Mom put on a smile and said, "We were driving nearby and thought we'd stop in. What a surprise to see everyone here." Her voice was sweet, but her eyes were sharp, scanning the place, the guests, the view. My dad nodded, pretending it was all coincidence. "We didn't expect such a big gathering, Ava," he said. I took a slow breath, forcing a calm smile. "You're welcome to join," I said. "There's plenty of food." I gestured toward the table, keeping my tone polite but distant. Inside, I felt a mix of emotions, anger, hurt, and a strange sense of victory. They hesitated but eventually sat down. People made space for them, though the mood shifted slightly. The air grew heavier. My mom started asking small questions, her tone filled with fake admiration. "So, this is your house?" "It's beautiful," she said, glancing at Ethan as if reminding him of what I had achieved. I simply nodded and poured myself another glass of wine. "Thank you," I replied softly. "I'm glad you like it." Ethan stayed quiet most of the time, pushing food around his plate. I could see how uncomfortable he was. My dad tried to make conversation with one of my business friends, pretending everything was normal. But everyone could sense the tension. As the evening went on, I didn't let it ruin my peace. I smiled, laughed with my guests, and kept the focus on gratitude and warmth. I treated my family like distant acquaintances, polite, kind, but unreachable. It was clear to everyone that the power dynamic had changed. For once, I was the one in control, and they were the outsiders trying to fit in. The waves kept crashing softly, the candles burned low, and I felt something I had never felt at any family dinner before: freedom. Dinner continued quietly for a while. Plates were passed around, the sound of waves mixed with soft music, and everyone seemed to enjoy the food. I could feel my parents watching me now and then, probably trying to find the right moment to speak. I stayed calm, chatting with my guests, making sure everyone felt welcome. For the first time, the attention was on me, not because I was trying to prove anything, but because I had finally built something worth noticing. My father cleared his throat halfway through the meal. He lifted his glass slightly and said, "It's good to see you doing well, sweetheart." His voice was low and careful, like he was walking on thin ice. My mother nodded quickly, adding, "Yes, we didn't realize how lovely your home is. You've done well for yourself." Her tone was polite, but I could hear the strain behind it. I smiled, keeping my composure. "Thank you," I said softly. "It's been a lot of hard work, but I'm grateful." I didn't add anything more, and for a few seconds no one spoke. Then I felt a quiet strength rise in me. I stood up slowly, holding my glass, and looked around the long table filled with faces. Some familiar, some new, all watching me. I took a deep breath and said, "I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. It means a lot to share this meal with people who truly value family, not because of what they can get from you, but because they care about who you are." The words came out calm but clear. I didn't raise my voice, yet the room went completely silent. My father froze with his fork halfway to his mouth. My mother looked down, pretending to adjust her napkin. Ethan's face went pale. I could feel the tension spreading across the table as everyone realized what I meant. I continued, my voice steady. For a long time, I thought family meant loyalty no matter what. I thought love meant forgiving people who kept breaking your heart. But I've learned that real family supports you, even when you outgrow their expectations. Real family doesn't make you feel small for chasing your dreams. My guests looked moved, some nodding quietly. My business partner reached over and squeezed my hand. I smiled at her, then looked back toward my parents. "I used to think being left out was the worst thing that could happen," I said softly. "But sometimes being left out gives you the chance to build your own table." No one said a word. The only sound was the ocean outside and the wind brushing through the palm trees. My mother's eyes shimmered, but she said nothing. My father leaned back in his chair, his face tight with pride and discomfort. Ethan looked like he wanted to disappear. I sat down again, calm and at peace. The heaviness in my chest was gone. I had said what I needed to say, not to hurt them, but to finally free myself from their hold. Around me, conversation slowly picked back up, gentle and genuine. The mood shifted again, not tense but lighter. The truth had been spoken, and there was no taking it back. For the first time in my life, I wasn't silent at the family table. I finally had a voice, and it felt powerful. For a few seconds after I finished speaking, the room stayed quiet. Then I heard a shaky breath and looked toward my mother. Linda's face had turned red, her eyes glossy. She slammed her napkin onto the table and said loudly, "So that's what this was all about? You invited everyone here just to embarrass us?" Her voice broke, and she started crying, but her tears didn't move me this time. I'd seen them too many times before. Tears she used to twist stories, to make herself the victim. I stayed calm, keeping my eyes on her. "No, Mom," I said softly. "I invited everyone here to celebrate Thanksgiving. If you feel embarrassed, maybe ask yourself why." Gasps rippled around the table. My father shifted in his seat, looking angry but trying to stay composed. "Ava, this is not the time or place," he said through gritted teeth. "You've made your point." But Ethan suddenly spoke up, his voice trembling. "No, Dad. Maybe it is the time." Everyone turned toward him. His hands were shaking as he pointed at our parents. "You two don't get to play innocent. You've been using Ava for years, taking her money, her kindness, and pretending it was for the family." Mom's head snapped toward him. "Ethan, stop it right now," she hissed, but he didn't. His eyes darted toward me, filled with guilt. "She deserves to know everything," he said quietly. "The mortgage wasn't the only thing. You used her money to pay off my credit card debt. You told her it was for house repairs." The table went silent again. My father's face drained of color. "That's enough," he barked. But Ethan kept talking, his words spilling out faster. "You made me lie to her, Dad. You said she wouldn't understand, that she had more than enough. You said it was just family helping family." I sat there, still and quiet. I had suspected something like this, but hearing it confirmed in front of everyone felt both painful and freeing. The people around the table looked shocked, some whispering, others staring at my parents with disbelief. My mother wiped her tears angrily. "We did what we had to do. She's rich. She wouldn't even miss the money." Her voice cracked. "All we wanted was to keep this family together, but you—" I raised my hand slightly to stop her. My voice was calm but firm. "You didn't want family, Mom. You wanted control. And when I stopped letting you use me, you decided I didn't belong anymore." I stood then, looking straight at both of them. "You told me I wasn't welcome at your table," I said quietly. "So I built my own." The room stayed frozen. My mother's crying turned into silence. My father's shoulders slumped. Ethan just stared down at his plate, ashamed. No one tried to defend them anymore. The truth was too clear. I looked around at the people who had come, people who had seen the real me that my parents never cared to know. "This dinner wasn't meant to hurt anyone," I said, my voice softer now. "It was meant to remind me that I deserve peace." With that, I sat down again and lifted my glass. The guests followed, raising theirs quietly in support. The tension slowly faded, replaced by something stronger, respect. My parents didn't say another word for the rest of the evening. They stayed seated for a few minutes, then quietly got up and left without a goodbye. Watching them walk away, I didn't feel pain. I felt release. After her parents left that night, the atmosphere in the villa slowly eased. The guests began talking again, softer now, with warmth in their voices. A few relatives came over to hug Ava. One of her aunts, who had always stayed quiet during family arguments, held her hand and said, "You did the right thing, dear. You've carried too much for too long." Others nodded in agreement, their faces filled with respect. For the first time, Ava didn't feel the need to defend herself or explain anything. People finally saw what she had been through. They understood that her silence all these years wasn't arrogance, it was survival. After the dinner ended, guests thanked her for inviting them and left with kind words. Some even apologized for believing the wrong stories in the past. As the last car drove away, Ava stood by the window, watching the reflection of the moon on the waves. Her house was quiet again, but it wasn't lonely. It felt peaceful. Her parents didn't call or text. Neither did Ethan. The next morning, news started to spread through the extended family about what had happened. Some people said they had never seen Mr. and Mrs. Taylor look so ashamed. They had left in silence, unable to face anyone. A few days later, Ava received a message from Chloe, Ethan's fiancée. It was short but honest. Chloe wrote, "I had no idea what they did to you. I can't marry someone who could treat his own sister that way. I'm sorry." Ava stared at the message for a moment, then simply replied, "Thank you for being honest." She didn't feel joy at Ethan's loss, just relief that the truth was finally catching up with everyone. Ethan didn't reach out either, but she heard through a cousin that he had moved out of their parents' house and was living alone. It seemed like he was finally facing the consequences of his choices. For once, Ava didn't feel responsible for fixing anyone's mess. She just let things unfold as they should. Each day after that dinner, Ava felt lighter. The weight she had carried for years, the guilt, the frustration, the need to prove herself, was gone. She realized she didn't need their approval to feel whole. Her success, her peace, her happiness, they were hers alone, earned through her own strength and persistence. She spent the following weekend walking along the beach, barefoot, with the sea breeze brushing against her face. She thought about the years she had begged for love that was never given, and how strange it felt to finally stop begging. She didn't hate her family. She just didn't belong to their version of love anymore. That Thanksgiving had started as a plan for a quiet dinner, but turned into the moment she reclaimed herself. Her parents' silence was not punishment, it was freedom. For the first time, Ava could breathe without feeling watched or judged. As she stood on the sand, watching the sunset paint the sky gold, she smiled softly. She hadn't needed revenge after all. The truth had spoken for her, and that was enough. 1 year later, Thanksgiving arrived again, and Ava woke up to the sound of the waves crashing softly outside her villa. The air was warm, the sky bright and peaceful. This time, the day didn't bring any anxiety or sadness. It felt different, lighter, calmer. She smiled to herself as she brewed coffee and looked out at the ocean, realizing how much her life had changed in just a year. Her dining room was filled with laughter and the smell of roasted turkey. Around her table sat people who truly cared for her closest friends, her business partner, and even a few kind neighbors who had become like family. They weren't connected by blood, but by kindness, respect, and shared stories. They appreciated her not for what she had, but for who she was. As they passed dishes around and shared what they were thankful for, Ava listened quietly. Her friend Jenna said, "I'm thankful for people who remind us that peace comes from letting go." Everyone nodded, and Ava felt her heart warm. She didn't need to make any grand speeches this time. The peace in her heart spoke for itself. When the meal ended, Ava walked out to the terrace with a glass of wine. The ocean shimmered gold under the setting sun, and the sky turned soft shades of pink and orange. She leaned on the railing, breathing in the salty air. For a moment, memories of her family crossed her mind. Her mother's sharp tone, her father's dismissive words, Ethan's constant favoritism. But instead of pain, she felt gratitude. She whispered softly, "Thank you for shutting me out. You gave me the space to build my own world." That sentence had been growing inside her for months, and finally saying it out loud felt freeing. They had pushed her away thinking it would hurt her. But instead, it gave her room to grow into her best self. Their rejection had been her beginning. As the evening grew darker, candles flickered along the table. Music played in the background, and everyone was laughing again. Ava realized this was what family should feel like, safe, joyful, and honest. She didn't need to keep proving her worth to anyone anymore. She had once thought success would heal her wounds, but now she knew peace came from acceptance. She had learned that forgiveness didn't mean letting people back in. It meant freeing herself from the bitterness they caused. She had stopped chasing approval and started choosing peace instead. Later that night, as everyone left, Ava stood by the door, saying goodbye with a genuine smile. When the last car drove away, she looked around her quiet villa and felt content. The same silence that once felt heavy now felt comforting. She walked back to the terrace barefoot, feeling the cool tiles under her feet. The moonlight shimmered across the water, and she smiled to herself. Life wasn't perfect, but it was hers, built on truth, peace, and strength. For the first time, she felt completely at home, surrounded by the love she created on her own terms.